I'm Emma from emmagossett.com and Emma Gossett Freedom Lifestyle. I wanted to tell you my story because I grew up in a cult. I want you to know the details of how that happened, how I came to be there, what it was like to grow up there, how it shaped me to be who I am today, and how I escaped. So buckle up. This is a wild, crazy story. All right. So if you don't already know me, if you see this video on YouTube or Facebook and you're not one of my friends, then I suggest that you watch this, because I want to use my story to inspire and motivate people, and if there's anyone in similar circumstances, to maybe encourage them to reach out and go for their dreams, because it doesn't matter where you come from, you can do and be whoever you want to be. All right? So I really know I need to do this because it's part of me being set free from my past. It's not a pretty story. It's long and crazy and weird, and 98% of the time you're probably not even going to believe me, but that's okay. A lot of people don't. It's wild. So, okay, here goes. I want to start with my parents because their background and them growing up does play a part in, how I came to be and in part of the story. So, and I just wanted to do a quick disclaimer. I'm so sorry about the shakiness of the video. Unfortunately, from my location, I don't have a setup that I could get something to hold my phone well, so I'm filming this on my phone. Anyways, and I also want you to know that while you're probably going to hear a lot of terrible, awful things, and you're going to wonder, oh my gosh, how can that even happen? And how can that happen to people? I want you to know that, well, most of the things I'll be talking about are not necessarily positive and wonderful and sweet. It wasn't all bad. It was my life, and I loved my parents. I loved my family. So I want you to know that this is in no means complaining or a pity party or feeling sorry for myself, okay? I just want to make that disclaimer that this is merely to help myself let go of the trauma and the hurt, and also to hopefully inspire you and encourage you in whatever situation you may be in. So, a little family history before we start. Both my parents, okay, so first of all, in a cult, most conservative cults in America, the way they're continued is by family. So your children grow up in it and they continue it and so on and so forth, and sometimes your family lines can be 400, 500 years old in the same cult. My personal story is different because that is not the case for me, and it makes a big difference, which later on I'll talk more about in this story. So my parents grew up what I would have called normal. They were just regular people. My mom graduated from college, typical American lives. Okay, so in my mom's house, God was not a part of their life, and in my father's house, God was a part of their life, but unfortunately, they also had a lot of other crazy, strange problems. So God being a part of their life didn't make a huge difference, if you know what I mean. So, disclaimer's over. So my parents not growing up in a cult, so meaning they weren't pre-programmed with it, they wasn't a part of them since they were little kids, it wasn't the only thing they know, made it so that they chose to join this cult. They, what I will call, were trapped by people with the wrong intentions. So when someone is unstable in their beliefs, when someone is wandering, they're much more likely to be picked up by people who are looking for that. So in other words, they were the perfect prey for the perfect predator. So that's kind of the cycle, if you can see that, all right? So they were wondering, they had just had their first child, they wanted to get closer to God, etc. So they were wondering, they started to read the Bible, and without someone to interpret it and help them to understand some of the things, a lot of things got mistaken because of the way they grew up, just looking at the Bible and seeing things and in their mind, the wrong kind of teachers teaching, etc. So they were the perfect prey for the perfect predator. And I know that sounds a little nasty, but it really is true, because most of these cults have nothing to do with God or religion. They're merely narcissistic men looking for people to prey upon and make them feel good about themselves. So they're building like a little system where people can lift them up and praise them and make them feel good because they can't do it on their own. All right, so if I talk about anything that doesn't make sense, I love to discuss things, but I would appreciate that there is no negativity or anything like that, because this is my story. This is how I see it. Everyone may see things a little differently. So I definitely would love to discuss. If you've had a similar experience, that would be very delightful. You know, there's not a lot of people who can understand where I come from, obviously, because it's quite a rare thing. So I always love when someone asks my story, or they see, you know, they ask me, why did I come here, or things like that. And I say, well, I grew up in a cult. And they just kind of look at me with their mouth open and go, are you kidding, or was that serious? And I'm like, I'm serious. And they're like, oh, okay. So, sorry, I wrote down a list of, if you wonder why I keep looking down, I wrote a list of notes out to help me remember. I mean, my story is very long. I wanted to remember a lot of points for you guys. I want you to really experience this. Hopefully I can say it in a way that you feel like you're there and you can experience it, because it is crazy. And it's something that's very misunderstood in America. You know, oftentimes, so now I'm going to move into who this cult was and how they got to it. If you're familiar with Anabaptists, so back in history, you know, like 500 years ago approximately, so a group of people broke off from both the Catholic and the Protestant church and began to try to follow the Bible exactly how it said. So they were naturally persecuted, and the Germans called them Anabaptists, all right? Extremely conservative. I'm trying to think of some points that may, I don't know, it's in most history, but, you know, I don't know. It started the revolution of Mennonites, Amish, German Baptists, all those super Christian conservative cults. So, this is a lot. I'm trying to get all the facts straight so I can tell you the emotional, the vulnerable side of it. These people would have called themselves Anabaptists. I usually use the words Mennonite and Amish to help you relate, because most people know what Mennonites or Amish, or at least have a good idea of what they look like, how they live, etc. So I use the words Amish and Mennonite, even though we did not call ourselves either. We were more conservative than Mennonites, but we also had electricity and cars for particular reasons, unlike Amish, who lived without any electricity or cars. So we were in between, you know, not exactly like either one. Beliefs were very close. For the most part, we believed the same things, we sang the same songs, we wore the same type of clothes, we lived the same kind of lifestyle, etc. In this particular cult, everyone was homeschooled, so there was no, unlike Mennonites and Amish, they do have their own schools. We were entirely homeschooled. Everyone. No one had went to school unless they had gone to school before. Like my mom, for example, graduated from college. No one had gone to school or been to any kind of school unless before they were in this cult. So that's another way they were different from Amish and Mennonite. Okay, I want to make sure I don't forget anything, because these are going to be long. So if you had asked them specifically, what do you guys call yourselves or associate with, they would have said Anabaptists, even though there are no technical denominations or organizations that are actually called Anabaptists. We just, I guess, I don't really know why they said that, I'll be honest. But they would have said that if you had asked. But we didn't affiliate with anyone, not even Amish or Mennonite. We were our own little group. We were the only church like us. There was no one else who we accepted to be the same as us. And for right now, I'm going to refer to it as subjective, because for sake of conversation. I am no longer any way associated with them, nor do I agree with them or anything. I'm just going to talk subjectively for the time being to help, you know, for sake of conversation. So anyways, the church didn't even have like a name. It was just called the church with the name of my hometown. There was no, you know, we were government-wise, we were classed with Amish. So we did have the same liberties, the same, what do you call it? The word's escaping me. The same privileges, I guess, that they had. So we were all Social Security exempt. We were all exempt from military drafts and things like that. I'm trying to think. We weren't necessarily taught this. This is just things I've overheard. So the group was entirely non-resistant, so there were no government, even if they were local government or state government positions allowed, no military, and no law enforcement whatsoever. They were completely separated. They took separated from the world very seriously, like literally black and white, like literally separated, which is really impossible because we all live on the same place. So the whole concept's a little bit misconstrued. But anyways, so I didn't know anything about government. I didn't know anything about law enforcement. I didn't know anything about the judiciary system. I didn't know anything about those kind of things because we weren't taught them, because we would have never, if we continued as everyone did in that place, we would have never needed to know about it because it wasn't used. People weren't allowed to take each other to court over problems. Even law enforcement was never called in. If there was a problem, it was purely, we were like about as separate as you can get, like our own little world inside of another world. So, I'm trying to think of some other really important points that they believed in. Everyone there did not work out in the world. Everyone had their own businesses, and whoever did not have their own business worked for those who did have businesses. So there was little to no connection or exposure to the outside world, especially for women and children. Men naturally did go out and do their work and things like that, but women and children, I mean, exposure to that world was maybe once a month when it came to things like shopping, which some people didn't even do it that then, or going to the library, things like that. So women and children, it was a very patriarchal system. So women and children were heavily put down. They were pretty much good for making babies and growing food, keeping the house. So for any woman who that wasn't her forte or her mind, it was very difficult because you were forced to be that even if it wasn't you naturally. And it created a lot of, hurting families because some people just aren't made to have big giant families and grow big giant gardens. Sorry to say. It's just not everyone can do that, even if you are forced to conform to that lifestyle. So now back to a little bit of my family history. My parents, after they had me, like right around the time that they were having me, sorry about that, notification, they started listening to people who may have been considered, what's the word? They weren't exactly correct in their interpretation of the Bible and interpretation of life and God and things like that. Started listening, and naturally it sounds good. When you grow up in the world and you're looking for something completely different from that, these kind of places look very attractive. They're like, oh my, these people know the truth, etc., etc., etc. So my parents began to get a little bit caught up, and somehow, I don't remember the exact details, but someone in Pennsylvania, my parents are in Oregon at this time, so I was born in Oregon. Someone in Pennsylvania, a Mennonite group in Pennsylvania, contacted my parents, and they thought that this was definitely sent from God. They wanted to leave the state. They wanted to get away from all family influences, because they felt that they were definitely better than the family and did not want their children growing up apparently with the family's influences. And that's going to sound weird because family is very important when it comes to growing up children, but sometimes people tend to think that they're way better than everyone around them, and it keeps them from seeing long-term benefits. So, anyways, I don't want to get too much into that in case my mom sees this. I don't want her to be hurt, because I don't blame any of my life on either of my parents, because they were unstable and they got caught by the wrong kind of people and influenced in really wrong ways, and they were only trying to do what they thought they were supposed to do. So I can't entirely blame it on them when they truly, literally, completely believed, and belief is really powerful, what they were doing for their family, to their family, with their family was totally right and what God wanted them to do. So, yeah, that's the beginning. They moved to Oregon. From Oregon to Pennsylvania when I was 2 and a half, 3. And then they were in Pennsylvania for 1 year, and I believe I turned 4 in Pennsylvania. Yes, because I was 4 when we came to Wisconsin. In Wisconsin, they came in contact. So that in that period in Pennsylvania, we were Mennonite. We were legit Mennonite. My mom dressed Mennonite. We went to a Mennonite church. We hung out with Mennonite people. So at that time, they were legit Mennonite. Then they got a hold of some other people who wanted to start their own church, their own kind of little thing in Alaska. And my parents thought, oh, okay, this must be what God, they felt that God wanted them to do that. They believed it. And whether or not he did, it's not really for me to say, but I don't think God leads us to do things that aren't his will or in his word. So I personally don't believe it was him guiding them. It's sometimes hard to distinguish what our mind wants and what God wants for us when we're unstable. So anyways, they're going to go with these people to Alaska and help them start this church up in Alaska. And on the journey they traveled through Wisconsin. They stop at a church that someone had said, hey, stop and check this out. And they never left. So this is this church that I'm talking about, what I grew up in from the age of, I was just turned 4 when we got there. And I was there until a year and a half ago. So that is when I talk about the cult, talk about the church, talk about where I grew up. This is where I'm referring to, central Wisconsin. So, and they had gone and visited my grandparents in that time. So now I've actually been across the USA for 6 times, a total of 6 times. So 3 of the times I was too little to really understand, and then 3 of the other 3 times were when we just moved back to Oregon lately, a year and a half ago. So yeah, crazy. I've lived on both ends, complete ends, Pennsylvania and Oregon, both ends of the United States, and then right smack in the middle in Wisconsin. So those are the 3 states I've lived in. I've got around a little bit. I've been to over half of all the states in the U.S. just from traveling, so including Hawaii. I actually went there when I was 4 months old. I don't remember, but the pictures were really beautiful. So naturally, my parents having my dad especially having some of a troubled background. My mom was a very kind of a leader kind of girl, and she did and went and whatever she wanted. That created the perfect ground for these people to come and sow in and cultivate with. So it was a perfect recipe for falling into this kind of place. And in another video, I'm going to go into more like, how does one join a cult? How does that happen? Why are people attracted to things that everyone else can see on the outside are like, whoa, something's wrong with that, but a few people seem to get caught in it. So that's another video though. So, and I think I explained the difference between a normal family history and cult family history. I don't think I went into detail as much as I wanted to. When you grow up in a cult, when your parents grow up in a cult, when your grandparents and your great-grandparents and everyone you know in your life has grown up in a particular lifestyle, if as far back as your family history knows, it's incredibly ingrained in your brain. Like, you can't understand anything else. Like, it's all you have there. It makes it incredibly difficult to accept any kind of new idea, to even open your mind enough to hear other ideas, because it's so settled into you that you can't accept anything else. Okay? So it's a little bit chilly today, so I thought I'd put on a jacket just in case I didn't want to get cold while I was doing this. So, but when you grow up, and the same goes for if you grow up in a typical American, your family through however many generations has grown up typical American, according to each generation, each time period, it's the same. You're ingrained in that kind of lifestyle. So my parents went from the normal family to a cult family lifestyle, and so it was not ingrained in their brains from childhood. And whatever's been ingrained in your brain from childhood, like the years 2 to 6, they say are the most important. So approximately that time period, however you were living, however your parents were living, whatever you experienced, is going to shape the rest of your life, literally. Your personality, what you do, the choices you make, etc. So if you do not grow up something, you change a complete lifestyle later on, it's not really in you. You're choosing to be there and you're choosing to believe it. But then as generations go on, it's not ingrained in them because of you. So naturally, my parents didn't have the hard, strong ties that everyone else I knew did to a place like that, because their families had grown up in it and way, way, way back. So this is going to be important for later on in how we were able to escape, because we weren't so terribly tied into it. Our family was all outside of the cult versus all of our family being inside of the cult. Because when you leave a cult, you leave everything. You leave any family that was there, any friends, any hopes, dreams, the lifestyle, you leave everything. So if your family's there, you will most likely never see your family again because you're not allowed to. And the same goes for being in the cult. When you join a cult and your family, everyone is everyone you know, friends, family, or outside of that, you're not really allowed to see those people because the cult doesn't allow you to, because they're different. They will influence you wrong. They will bring wrong ideas into your head, and they will make you doubt, and they will be a bad influence in your family. So that's also going to be important later, because my grandparents visiting us once a year made a huge difference in our children's lives. It honestly probably kept us going, because our grandparents were totally, American grandparents. They were wonderful. Anyways, more about that later. Now I want to tell you a little bit about who I am personally, because that makes a big difference in how I've been able to get out of the cult so well, and how I was able to avoid the brainwashing. I was the oldest of 9 children. All of my siblings, except for one, the next one under me, has been born into some kind of cult. So either the Mennonites or this cult that we are in for the last, I think it was like 18 years or 17 years. Okay, so all my siblings, they were born into it. They didn't know anything else. I really didn't know anything else either, because when you're 3 years old, you don't really remember much before then. So technically, I just wasn't specifically born into it, which, interesting enough, I think does make a difference. I don't know. There's just something about it. It's probably, there's some scientific thing to prove it, but it does make a difference in what you're exactly born into. So anyways, I am very self-confident, or maybe not self-confident, I'm a very confident person. I'm a leader. I take charge if I see a need for taking charge. If I have a problem, I find a solution. If I just very figure things out. I mean, that's always been me. I have figured out anything I had a question about, I knew there was an answer for, and I went and looked for the answer. Even if I knew everyone around me couldn't give it to me, I went and looked for it in some way, even if I just had to think about it for 10 days until I got some clarity, because I found answers to my questions kind of person. And I'm also one of those people who doesn't take what people say. Like, I don't just believe what you tell me. I think about it, I think, okay, does that make sense? Does that line up? Does it make sense in my subconscious mind, that the part of my mind that already knows all the natural laws, that knows all the parts of the world, does it fit into the natural laws and the theories that create, that make this world go around? And then maybe I go research it if it's like a scientific fact or, a theory or something. I'll research it and I'll think about it. Like, I don't just accept things for face value. I always know there's something underneath. There's something underneath that isn't, we're not seeing everything. There's still a part to this we can't see, because we as humans can't see all the sides. We can only see one side, the side that's facing us. So I tend to be one of those people, I want to go around and check out all the sides and make sure I'm looking at it circumspectly. I want to make sure, because I hate those people who are what might be considered wise in their own opinion. Like, they just believe stuff because they believe it. There's no proof to it. It may not even be true, but they just believe it because they want to believe it or they like to believe it. I really don't like that. So I want to check something out completely before I settle on the fact that this is true and then add it to my belief system. So that all being said, it's made me, so when I was in that cult, even growing up, I remember 4 years old, when my parents went through the rituals of joining this cult, I remember I was in a frenzy. I was throwing a huge fit, I'm 4 years old, so, 4-year-old tantrum. On the backseat of my parents' car, I was just throwing a fit. I was so angry because I don't know why, but ever since I came to that place, I hated it. There was just something wrong with it. And I know it was real, because children can sense things. They can see more than what adults can. They know good and evil. Like, they know when something isn't right. And the leader, and specifically, I mean, if there's such a thing as righteous vengeance, I had it. Because I would not look in his eyes. I would not talk about him unless it was in a negative way. I would not come into any kind of contact with him, if at all possible. Being 4 years old, you kind of sometimes can't help that, because adults, they tend to override your childhood capabilities, being big and strong. So I remember that day very vividly, that I was of course I got in huge trouble for it, because my parents didn't understand why I was doing it, and I was too proud, I guess, to say why I was doing it. Throwing a huge fit in the backseat of the car because my parents were joining this place, and it just made me so angry. I mean, here I am, 4 years old, what do I know? All I knew was that this was bad, and I didn't like what my parents were doing. That was all I knew. So from a very young age, I knew that something wasn't right, and I was one of those girls that I like stuff. I like abundance. I'm I'm a slightly materialistic. It's maybe a fault of mine, not overly materialistic. I don't hoard things or I don't covet things, but I definitely like nice stuff. I like nice things. I like to look nice. I like to be nice, etc., etc. So as a little girl growing up in this kind of a place, it was very difficult to understand why all the other things I saw on a very rare basis were being withheld from me. It didn't make sense. Like, why were they so evil? Like, okay, for example, jewelry and makeup. You know, those are things that little girls, even not so little girls, really like and they want to eventually have. You know, shoes, pretty shoes, they're pretty clothes. You know, the clothes we wore were extremely boring and drab. They were all exactly the same. Everyone in the church wore exactly the same thing. Women wore these one-piece dresses with some kind of top to make it more modest. Guys wore button-up shirts and long pants with long sleeves. Okay, so everyone had long sleeves and super long, like to our ankle dresses, and they were always made of dark colors with very little print on them. So very boring and drab, and usually it was hand-me-downs from someone because my mom was busy with all these little girls she had, and she didn't have the time to go and make all of us new clothes because all of the clothes were homemade, every single piece, except for sometimes some of the guys, like jeans and stuff, were purchased for men. But all of the women's clothes were completely homemade, so my mom did not have the time as a young mom trying to, figure everything out to make us all clothes. So I usually got hand-me-downs from other girls in the church who had grown up before me. And naturally they were boring drab. And I liked color. I liked variety. I get bored easily. I need different things. I want to wear a different kind of clothing every single day or a different color or something at least. This was impossible here. And even at a young age, I didn't understand it because that was my personality. It was who I was. I don't know if you want to call it ADHD or whatever. But my parents didn't believe in those kind of diseases. So naturally, if any child did have symptoms of that, they were treated exactly the same as all other children. So discipline was the same, everything. So if I did have any of that, well, it somehow got taken care of. I don't know. Anyways, the reason I'm telling you all of this is because it actually protected me from being brainwashed by this place. While everyone around me is just open mouthed, soaking it in, believing every word they hear, the leader was referred as God. No one could hear God's voice as well as he could. He could talk to God for all the rest of us. What he said was what God said. Okay? So no one challenged him. No one even discussed what he said. It was his word or big trouble. I was not that way. I never accept someone's word on the first try. Even if I have to, I will, facially, but I won't accept it inside. I'm like, nuh-uh, I gotta figure this out. I gotta, find out about this. So, all this brainwashing that we heard every single day of our lives from the leader, from the leaders being passed on to everyone else, to our parents, etc., and eventually to us. That we heard, we saw, we lived, all this brainwashing we heard, we lived, we saw every single day, it did not take the effect on me like 99.9% of everyone else there. Like, I'm probably the only person that even thought or had the personality that I do there. Because anyone who showed any kind of personality like that was quickly stomped out, was quickly changed. Sometimes took drastic measures, but they were quickly turned into a quiet, obedient little sheep that just followed whatever they were told. And if you can get anything as opposite of me as possible, that would be it. A quiet little following sheep that just does whatever it's told. Okay, so I couldn't be farther from that. So it protected me. The personality I had, even though I got in trouble an awful lot, I went without all kinds of terrible things happened to me because of this way I was. Because sometimes I just couldn't take it and I'd lash out. As a little kid, you'd lash out and you'd say the wrong thing, or you'd act the wrong thing, or you'd look the wrong thing, or whatever, and you got severely punished. And when you guys think you know discipline, you don't know discipline. Okay, so because the army of the law did not extend to these places, or at least not that they would know of, no one would ever know it, they could really do whatever they wanted. So I just remember, oh my gosh, I don't even know if I can talk about this because this is a super, super tender spot for me, talking about discipline, because I watched so many children get so hurt and so changed, their personalities completely forced to be different from who they were. I learned very quickly to not be who I was. Pretend I was just that quiet little sheep that followed whatever they told. I pretended that the whole time. I did whatever I was told. I did whatever would make me good, because I knew that was the only way I was going to stay alive, figuratively, So, yeah, most of the times I was punished was probably for trying to not be like everyone else, because that's just who I was. I hated people following me. A lot of as the oldest, all my younger siblings, they'd want to do what I did and stuff, and I hated that. They'd want to wear the same color of dress material, or they'd want to make the same kind of, we'd make little homemade cards for people. They would make the same thing, and I hated that because I wanted to be different. I wanted to be an individual, and I think that's also a downside. It doesn't nullify big families, but it's a downside, is that when there's so many children, there's no individuality. Everyone's a carrot in a soup pot. No one knows the difference. We're all stirred around and we're just all one big thing. No one sees the different capabilities, the different specialties about each one. We're just all the same, and we're all treated the same. So I was desperate to be different. I was desperate to be individual. I was desperate to be just something. And as I got older, I got little chances to be this way. When I started, I turned out to have a big gift for sewing and making clothes. So I ended up making all the family's clothes once I got old enough and knew how, which is still pretty young. I think I was like 7 or 8 when my mom started showing me how to sew doll clothes. We'd start with doll clothes. They were exact imitations of what we wore. And then I eventually moved up to, real people clothes. And I would start tweaking patterns a little bit, just to make them different, because I was so desperate for something different, something pleasant, something new, because our life was so boring and drab, because there's absolutely no, what do you want to call them, like, no trappings of life. There was no, oh my gosh, the word's totally escaping me. Sorry. No, decorations. Maybe that's the word. There were no decorations. Our walls were completely bare, like completely bare. There was no decorations. There was no beauty. It was as if you could strip everything from life but the bare necessities. That would be what it was like. Because anything beyond the bare necessities was a delicacy. It was going to it would maybe trip us up. It would maybe cause us to stumble and become proud or think of ourselves highly or something like that. So it was the bare necessities, the bare walls, the bare furniture, the bare food, etc. as it could get, to keep us. I mean, honestly, now when I'm saying this, I believe a certain way. Like, the reason I believe they kept life so bare is because it kept people in a negative, low state. It kept them from feeling good about themselves. It kept them from being happy. And when you're constantly like that, you never strive for better things. You just kind of slowly sink lower and lower and lower and lower and lower until you just conform to whatever you're told to stay safe. So they kept you bored and unfulfilled, almost in a sense, or maybe just fulfilled enough to not want more. It's another symptom of a narcissist. A narcissist will do that for people. They will keep people in their grasp, and they will purposely keep them unhappy. They will purposely keep them hurting, purposely keep them ashamed, to keep them in their grasp. Because if a person breaks out of that, they're going to break out of the grasp of a narcissist, and they may go and find a better life. They may go and look for more. They might start discovering. They might start thinking. We couldn't even read the Bible for ourselves, not with an open mind, because we were taught what it actually said. This is what this means. This is what this means. This is what every single Sunday, and more times than that too if you talk to people. This is what everything meant. So whether it lined up or not, you didn't question that. You just knew that this is what they said it was, so this is what it must mean. There was no figuring anything out for yourself. It came from the top. Everything we believed, knew, understood, came from the top. Okay, so absolutely no figuring out on your own. And if you tried that, if you tried to question, if you tried to bring things up, you're immediately disciplined. If you're not familiar with that term, it's a lot like you heard of shunning by the Amish. You were put under very strict and very hurtful discipline to shame you so hard you'd eventually just change. You'd eventually admit that they were right and you were wrong, etc., etc., etc. And for some of you, this may be familiar, because I know that there are single persons, like the father of a family, or some kind of patriarch in the family who's a lot like this. They keep everyone under their thumb. And it's only for their benefit, not those people. It was only for the leader, the instigator's benefit. Somehow it made him feel better to do that. It's a symptom of a narcissist, really. But anyways, there's so many cool things when you start diving deep into the I guess for lack of better words, the anatomy of the mind and where cults come from. There's nothing to do with God, okay? Nothing to do with living right or any of that. People are tricked into them by thinking that. That's how they get them there. But when they're built, set up, run, it has nothing to do with God, okay? Just, we're gonna, I don't even want to, like, I can't even discuss that part because I feel so strongly about it. And I've studied a lot because we eventually started looking for answers, and we were going, this isn't making sense. Horrible things happen to our family. Horrible, horrible, horrible things you can't even imagine. Well, maybe you can imagine them, but you probably can't imagine them actually happening, like people actually going through it. And I'll go into more detail of that. I'm already at 35 minutes, and I want to hold your interest. So I'm sorry this is so long. I have a lot of stuff to say. I have no idea how many videos I'm going to make. I'm going to just keep talking until I finish the story. And I have to be honest, I haven't gotten very far. I'm kind of building up, I'm trying to build a picture in your mind so you can understand everything I say afterwards, so it can fit into it, because otherwise everything I say is going to be like, what? So, I think I've kind of mentioned everything. I call this video the early years. So the early years for both my parents and for me, kind of the setting up of this whole system, how we got into it, how my parents got into it, I should say, and why it never had its grasp on me like it had a grasp on most people. Hopefully I made that clear enough, that who I was naturally kept me from being completely, don't get me wrong, I was hurt, and I had the wrong ideas about certain things, but it never had the grasp on me like it does everyone I knew there, and they're still there. Okay, when we first got to this cult, it was, I think, 20 years old. Now it's about 35 years old. And when we were there, it was at its peak years, its biggest attendance, or its biggest, biggest amount of people in it. It was at its best time. And from the last 5 years before we left to now, it's slowly going down, 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 down. And it will forever go, unless they find a way to revive it and get more people a part of it and try to revamp their system just enough to keep people there. They're just going to keep on going down. But you see, the reason they have such a tight grasp on families and they're so hard on children and growing up, and I mean, if you can imagine children, this is their view of children. Children came out as lumps of clay, and then they molded those children to be whatever they wanted them to be, which was going to be more copies of everyone else in there. When children are born, they're already molded, okay? They're already the person that they're going to be when they grow up. Parents and people who are part of the family are there just to guide and to teach the things they don't already know, okay? Children come out, they're already who they're going to be. They're already molded. They're already made. But the problem with this was that they took us and they saw us as we were not molded. We were just pieces of nothing that they had to make. And since with that idea, they could make us into whatever they wanted, right? So they'd have to squash anything that was natural about us, any personality traits, any tendencies, any wants, likes, desires, anything like that. They'd have to squash that. They'd completely revamp it to make us a perfect little image of the kind of people they needed there. And those kind of people were people who couldn't make their own decisions. They were people who couldn't even decide what house to buy without someone else's permission, which was usually the leader. Because they were taught to only obey. They could only hear another's voice. There was no me. There was no, I'm separate, I'm individual, I've got emotions, I've got needs, I've got wants. No, none of that. Anyways, I'm jumping ahead of myself. The next video is growing up in a cult. So this is going to be from, the time I'm speaking about right now, and I'm maybe, 6 or 7 years old, up until like 15 or so. Okay, so that's going to be the next video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope it's been an eye-opener, because so many people have the wrong view. TV shows and books and stuff have given us this cute little wonderful view of Amish and Mennonites and that kind of lifestyle. But what people don't realize is there's way more than meets the eye. They have no idea what it's really like and why they have the lifestyle that they do. It's a great looking lifestyle, but they don't have that lifestyle because it's great and it's wonderful.